Have you ever noticed that the older you get, the less certain you become? It's strange because when we are young, certainty comes easy. At 10 years old, we think adults know everything, teachers know everything, our parents know everything, and somewhere along the way, we quietly assume that one day we'll wake up and somehow everything will make sense. We'll understand relationships, we'll understand careers, we'll understand who we are, and maybe, if we are lucky, we'll finally have life figured out. But then something strange happens. We grow older, and instead of finding answers, we find questions, more questions, questions we never thought to ask. And perhaps that's one of the strangest things about growing up. Because the more we learn, the less we seem to know. And maybe that's not a flaw, maybe that's wisdom. I think one of the greatest gift of youth is confidence, and one of its greatest dangers is also confidence. Because when we are young, life seems simple. We know exactly what we want, exactly who we are, and exactly where we want to go. By 25, we have everything sorted out: a stable job, a healthy relationship, financial freedom, maybe a house, maybe children, maybe the perfect life. At least that's what we tell ourselves. But life has a funny way of ignoring our plans. Career changes, people leave, dreams evolve, and suddenly the future we imagined looks nothing like the future we received. And at first, that realization can feel disappointing. But maybe it shouldn't, because perhaps growing older isn't about becoming more certain. Perhaps it's about becoming more comfortable with uncertainty. And that's a very different thing. Think about the first time you learned something new. Maybe it was playing guitar, maybe it was photography, maybe it was fitness. At the beginning, everything feels easy. You watch a few videos, read a few articles, and suddenly you feel like you've got it. And then you go deeper and you realize that there are techniques you didn't know that existed, and then deeper still. And suddenly you realize that the people who've spent 20 years mastering their craft still consider themselves students, which feels almost unfair. Because shouldn't knowledge make everything simpler? Shouldn't experience remove uncertainty? Apparently not. In fact, it seems to do the opposite. The more the more your world expands, the more you realize how much of it remains unexplored. It's almost ironic. Knowledge doesn't shrink mystery. Sometimes it makes the mystery bigger. And maybe that's why the smartest people you've ever met aren't always the loudest, because they have seen enough. To understand how much remains unseen, psychologists have a name for this: the Dunning Kruger effect. A fascinating phenomenon where people with very little knowledge tend to overestimate how much they know. And honestly, we've all been there. For example, watch two videos on investing and suddenly you're Warren Buffett. Read one book on relationship and you're giving advices to everyone around you. And it's funny, but it's also human because ignorance is invisible and you don't know what you don't know. And ironically, the people who know the least often sound the most certain, while those with experience speak with caution. Because experience teaches complexity, and complexity teaches humility. Perhaps wisdom is in becoming the person with all the answers. Perhaps wisdom is becoming the person who is willing to admit that they don't have them. Thousands of years ago, Socrates was declared the wisest man in Athens. And according to the story, he was confused because he didn't believe he was wise. So he spent years questioning politics, poets, scholars, people who were considered experts, and what he discovered surprised him. Many of them believed they knew far more than they actually did, and eventually Socrates came to a conclusion. Perhaps the reason he was considered wise was because he understood something everyone else had missed. He understood his own ignorance. And that famous phrase emerged: I know that I know nothing. At first, it sounds depressing, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's freedom. Because pretending to know everything is exhausting. Pretending to understand every issue, every person, every problem eventually becomes impossible. And perhaps wisdom begins the moment we become comfortable saying, I don't know. Human beings love certainty. We crave it. We want guarantees. We want formulas. We want five-step plans. We want to know what if we do everything right, everything will work out. But life rarely makes those promises. You can love deeply and still lose people. You can work hard and still fail. You can do everything correctly and still end up somewhere unexpected. And maybe that's what makes uncertainty so much more uncomfortable, because uncertainty reminds us that we are not in control, and we hate that. We hate not knowing, we hate waiting, we hate ambiguity, which is probably why confident people are so attractive. People who speak with certainty, people who have an answer for everything, people who never seem to doubt themselves. But confidence and wisdom aren't always the same thing. Sometimes confidence comes from seeing one side, wisdom comes from seeing 10 different things. When we are young, the world feels black and white: good people, bad people, success, failure, heroes, villains. But then life happens and suddenly things become more complicated. You meet kind people who make terrible choices. You meet broken people carrying wounds nobody can see. You meet successful people who are lonely and ordinary people who are deeply happy. And slowly, certainty begins to fade. Not because you've become weak, not because you've become confused, not because life has taught you compassion, and maybe wisdom doesn't make us superior, maybe it just makes us gentler. Maybe wisdom isn't about winning arguments, maybe it's about understanding people. When we are young, we want answers. How do I become successful? How do I avoid failure? How do I become happy? How do I find the right person? But eventually, the question themselves begin to change. What kind of success is worth pursuing? What is enough? What kind of person am I becoming? What matters in the end? Maybe life is something to experience, something to grow through, something to continually rediscover. And perhaps wisdom isn't collecting answers. Perhaps wisdom is learning how to ask better questions. I think one of the strangest things about growing older is that you stop trying to appear intelligent. You stop needing to win every debate. You stop pretending you have everything figured out, and instead, you become curious. You listen more, you judge less, you speak slower. You realize that every person you meet knows something that you don't. And perhaps that's what humility really is: not thinking less of yourself, but understanding that you'll never stop learning. And strangely enough, that's beautiful. Because if there's still more to learn, then there's still more to discover, still more to experience, still more to become. When I was younger, I wanted certainty, I wanted answers, I wanted guarantees. But maybe life was never meant to come with one. Maybe wisdom isn't reaching the end. Maybe wisdom is understanding that there is no end. Just more questions, more experiences, more lessons. And perhaps the wisest words a person can say are not, I figured it all out, but simply I'm still learning. And maybe that's the wisdom paradox. Thank you for listening to Between Thoughts. So until next time, keep asking questions and stay curious.